At exactly 02:18 a.m., deep inside Israel's Southern Air Defense Command Center, a radar operator noticed something unusual. A new track had appeared on the long-range early warning screen. One object high altitude moving fast, very fast. The trajectory pointed west across the desert toward one of Israel's most strategically important military installations, Loadout Airbase, home to some of the country's most advanced fighter aircraft. At first, the system classified it as a standard ballistic missile, speed Mach 8, altitude over 90,000 feet, estimated time to target 3 minutes. Within seconds, alarms began sounding across the command center. Missile defense crews moved instantly. Data streamed across digital displays as Israel's layered defense network activated. The Arrow missile defense system prepared for interception. Operators began calculating the missile's predicted impact zone. Everything about the launch looked familiar. Ballistic trajectory, high-speed descent, single incoming target. But as the radar continued tracking the object, something strange began to appear in the data. The missile was slowing down. Ballistic missiles do not slow down during their terminal phase. They accelerate, yet this object was losing speed as it approached Israeli airspace. Command officers leaned over the radar consoles. New telemetry appeared, altitude dropping, speed falling. The missile's behavior no longer matched any known Iranian ballistic system. Recalculate the trajectory, one officer ordered. The computers ran the prediction again. The result was even more concerning. The missile was not heading toward a city. It was heading directly toward Nevatim Airbase, one of Israel's most critical military hubs. Runways, aircraft shelters, fuel depots, command facilities, and dozens of combat aircraft. The Arrow interceptors were seconds from launch authorization when the missile entered its final approach phase. Altitude, 40,000 feet. Speed, rapidly decreasing. Time to target under 60 seconds. Then something happened that no one in the command center had ever seen before. The missile did not dive toward the ground. Instead, the warhead section suddenly opened in midair. For a brief moment, the radar screen flickered. One target became many, 40, then 48, dozens of small objects spilling out into the night sky above the airbase. They were not debris. They were moving, independently, guided. The missile had not been a weapon, it had been a delivery system. And now, descending silently toward Israel's most important airbase, a swarm of attack drones had just been released. For a fraction of a second, the radar screens inside the Air Defense Command Center froze. Then the system recalculated. What had been one incoming missile was now 48 separate aerial contacts spreading rapidly across the sky above Nevatim Airbase. The computers struggled to classify them. They were too small to be aircraft, too slow to be ballistic warheads, too coordinated to be debris. The radar operator zoomed the display. Each object was descending in a controlled glide pattern. Speed 220 miles per hour. Altitude dropping through 30,000 feet. Direction directly toward the airbase perimeter. Within seconds, the threat classification changed. Not a missile, a swarm. Sirens erupted across Nevatim. Red warning lights flashed along the runways and inside the aircraft shelters. Ground crews stopped mid-task and looked toward the sky. Inside the base operations center, commanders watched the radar feed update again. 48 drones had split into 4 separate attack groups. Each formation was heading toward a different part of the base. One group angled toward the main runway, another toward the hardened aircraft shelters, a third toward the fuel storage tanks, and the fourth toward the air defense radar station itself. The pattern was too precise to be random. Every drone appeared to be following a pre-programmed attack route. The base defense systems began reacting instantly. Short-range air defense batteries activated. Electronic warfare teams attempted to jam incoming signals. Point defense guns rotated toward the descending swarm, but the radar picture created a problem. Missile defense networks like Arrow and David's Sling were designed to destroy high-speed missiles, not dozens of small autonomous drones attacking simultaneously from different directions. Each drone had a radar signature barely larger than a bird, and they were spreading out fast. At 20,000 feet, the swarm changed formation again. The drones descended sharply, now flying low, below the coverage of some long-range radar systems. Inside the base, air crews ran toward their aircraft. Emergency scramble procedures had already begun, but the runway lights suddenly shut off. The base had entered combat blackout mode. Overhead, the swarm continued its descent. 48 drones, 48 separate targets, less than 1 minute from the ground, and Nevatim Airbase was directly beneath them. At 3,000 feet above Nevatim Airbase, the drone swarm began its final attack sequence. The 48 drones separated into smaller strike groups, each one locking onto a different target across the base. Inside the air defense control room, alarms were now constant, threat indicators flashing across every display. The base commander gave the order, "Engage all targets." Instantly, point defense systems opened fire. Rapid-fire anti-aircraft guns roared to life along the perimeter. Streams of tracer rounds climbed into the night sky. Two drones shattered in midair, then another, but the swarm kept coming. They were flying low and fast, weaving unpredictably as they descended. Electronic warfare units attempted to jam their navigation systems. High-power interference signals flooded the airspace, but the drones continued on course. They were not relying on external control. Each one carried its own autonomous guidance system. At 800 feet altitude, the first group crossed the base perimeter. The lead drone dived sharply toward the main runway. 3 seconds later, it struck. A violent explosion tore a crater into the asphalt. Flames and debris erupted into the air. Ground crews scattered as shockwaves rolled across the runway. Before the smoke cleared, the second wave hit. 4 drones slammed into the hardened aircraft shelters. Concrete blast doors buckled under the impacts. Inside one shelter, a parked fighter aircraft was engulfed in fire. Moments later, another explosion erupted near the fuel storage tanks. A fireball lit up the desert sky as burning fuel poured across the ground. The attack had lasted less than 90 seconds, yet the base was already in chaos. Multiple fires burned across the airfield. Emergency crews raced toward the damaged shelters. Fire suppression systems activated automatically, but the damage was done. The main runway was heavily cratered. Aircraft were trapped on the ground. And the radar station that controlled the airbase defenses had taken a direct hit. High above the smoke and flames, the last surviving drones spiraled downward. Some were shot out of the sky. Others detonated against secondary targets. By the time the final explosion echoed across the airfield, the swarm was gone. 48 drones had arrived. Almost none remained. But in less than 2 minutes, Israel's most important airbase had been crippled. Inside the command bunker, officers stared at the burning runways on their screens. One fact was now clear. This had not been a random strike. It had been a demonstration of a new weapon. While emergency crews battled fires across Nevatim Air Base, another operation was already underway. Inside Israel's National Command Network, intelligence officers were tracking the attack back to its origin. The missile that had released the drone swarm had not come from nowhere. Its launch had been detected, its flight path recorded, and the coordinates of the launch site had already been transmitted to the Israeli Air Force Strike Command. Exactly 22 minutes after the attack began, the response was authorized. At 03:02 a.m., 4 F-35I Adir stealth fighters lifted off from another Israeli airbase deep inside the country. Their mission was simple: find the source of the new weapon and destroy it. Long before the aircraft even left the runway, Israeli surveillance systems had already been watching the region. Satellites, electronic intelligence stations, and airborne radar platforms had been tracking unusual activity near a missile complex in western Iran for nearly 12 hours. When the swarm missile launched, those suspicions became certainty. Now the coordinates were locked. The F-35 pilots received their targeting data while still climbing through 25,000 feet. Speed increasing, formation tight, stealth systems active. The aircraft crossed into hostile airspace undetected. No radar lock, no warning, no interception. The first target appeared on their displays just minutes later. A mobile missile launch platform hidden inside a reinforced concrete shelter. The same type of launcher that had fired the swarm missile. The strike package released its weapons. 2 precision-guided bombs dropped silently from the lead aircraft. Seconds later, the shelter disappeared in a massive explosion. Secondary detonations followed immediately. Stored missiles ignited inside the structure, but the strike was not finished. Israeli intelligence had identified 3 additional facilities connected to the drone swarm weapon: a drone assembly warehouse, a command coordination center, and a storage depot believed to contain more of the swarm missiles. One by one, the targets were eliminated. Precision bombs punched through rooftops and detonated inside. The drone factory erupted in flames. The command center collapsed under the blast, and the storage depot exploded with a series of violent shockwaves that shook the surrounding desert. In less than 9 minutes, the entire launch infrastructure had been destroyed. By the time Iranian air defense systems began searching the sky for attackers, the F-35 strike group was already turning west, their mission complete. Behind them, the facilities responsible for the drone swarm attack burned in the darkness, and Israel's message had been delivered. The weapon that had crippled Nevatim Air Base had been used once. It would not be used again that night. By 06:40 a.m., the fires at Nevatim Air Base were finally coming under control. Smoke still drifted across the damaged runway. Emergency crews moved methodically between the craters, inspecting the shattered asphalt and burned aircraft shelters. The attack itself had lasted less than 2 minutes. But the implications were far larger than the damage on the ground, because what had struck the base was not a conventional missile, it was something different. For decades, airbases around the world had been designed to survive missile attacks. Reinforced shelters, layered missile defense systems, runway repair teams trained to operate under bombardment. But the weapon used that morning had bypassed many of those assumptions. The missile had never intended to strike the ground, it had only been a carrier. A delivery system designed to release dozens of small autonomous drones directly above the target. Instead of one large explosion, the base had faced 48 simultaneous threats. Each drone attacking a separate point: runways, fuel storage, aircraft shelters, radar stations. Traditional missile defense systems had been forced to react to dozens of low-altitude targets at once. And even 1 minute of confusion had been enough. Yet the response had been just as fast. Israeli intelligence systems had traced the weapon back to its launch infrastructure within minutes. Stealth aircraft had eliminated the production and launch sites before sunrise. By mid-morning, military analysts were already studying what had happened. One conclusion was clear. Modern warfare was changing. Missiles alone were no longer the only threat. Swarm weapons, combining ballistic delivery with autonomous drones, had introduced a new challenge for air defense networks. A single launch could suddenly become dozens of coordinated attacks. And the battlefield could change in seconds. But the events of that morning also demonstrated something else. Speed of response still mattered, technology mattered. And the ability to detect, adapt, and retaliate faster than the opponent remained decisive. By 0900 a.m., official reports began reaching international media. 1 drone swarm missile launch. 48 attack drones deployed. Several facilities at Nevatim temporarily disabled. But the launch complex responsible for the weapon had been destroyed within hours. Runway repair teams had already begun restoring operations. Aircraft were being relocated, and Israeli air defenses were adapting their systems for the next threat. Because in modern warfare, the first appearance of a new weapon is rarely the last. Some lessons are written in strategy rooms. Others are written in burning runways and silent radar screens. And sometimes, they are written in the moment when one missile opens in the sky, and the battlefield suddenly becomes 48 different attacks at once.